This is Ag, a show about fascinating and inspiring stories of leaders in agriculture that challenge us to think and introspect on how we lead our lives and our organizations. And this is your host, Kirti Mutatkar, President and CEO of United Ag. My guest today is Lee Cohen, General Manager of Setton Farms. I have known Lee for a few years now. And every time I talk to Lee, I notice that I'm left feeling energized. Recently, Lee and I were chatting about how agricultural leaders are the true stewards of the earth and of the people. I was so inspired by that conversation that day with Lee that I decided to drive down to Terra Bella, California to have a deeper conversation with him. So here I am today in Terra Bella, California at Setton Farms chatting with Lee.
So my father-in-law, he came from Egypt in the mid-1950s to America, and one of the things that he and his brothers did was start a bakery. So they started a commission bakery in Brooklyn where they wouldn't even bake anything. They would take products from others, display it, and sell it for a commission. And eventually they moved into things that they knew, like dried fruits and nuts, because they were from Egypt, and they were very successful in that. And they ultimately had about 15 stores across New York, the New York area. Pretty successful, thriving business. This is decades before natural food stores were even a thing, so they were really visionaries in their time, I think. But then there was an embargo of pistachio nuts, so they imported all things, cashews, pistachios from Iran. And then there was an embargo of the pistachios.
So this was, they were importing prior to getting it from the U.S. So the
retail businesses developed into a wholesale business, which kind of led to an import business. And they became really the largest importers of cashew nuts and pistachio nuts really in America.
Ah, okay. That's interesting.
In fact, there were just two companies at the time importing, well-known companies importing pistachios from Iran, Zenobia and Setton, and that's where the red dye came from. Those two companies really invented the red dye to cover the blemishes of the original Iranian pistachio nuts. They didn't look very nice.
Oh, that's interesting. So there was a red dye to cover the blemishes because people were not comfortable eating something
people
that
who grew up eating pistachio nuts, in the late 1970s and early 80s, remember that they were red. They were all dyed red, and you had piles of red shells, and your fingers were red. And then the FDA banned that particular red ingredient, the red dye. So then we had to switch. It was a big, calamity. We switched, and then ultimately it just got it faded away because the quality of California pistachio nuts were superior to Iranian. We no longer needed to cover them in paint.
Oh, that's such an interesting story. Yeah. I didn't know that.
So we stopped doing that a long time ago, but that was the original reason. Anyway, after the embargo, they couldn't import Iranian pistachios, so the Setton family pivoted to California, where they started planting, or they built a commercial processing plant to take recently planted pistachio orchards into their facility to sell them in the Northeast. And that kind of just grew and grew and grew. So the idea that the pistachio tree is a very kind of a long horizon crop, I think, helps us in our thinking. So when we plant pistachios, we plant it really for our children. People say you plant almonds for yourself and you plant pistachios for your children. I think that does hold true.
That's interesting. So the reason, Lee, I was telling you earlier, the reason this idea of the podcast came up was from agriculture. What is something that somebody else could, outside of agriculture, would learn, right? So this is an interesting point you just made where you said the almonds, you plant them for your kids and the pistachios are for your grandkids. That kind of gets me thinking, so you are actually taking care of something, you're building something for grandkids. So you're building something along sustaining business, right?
More than 90% of farms are family farms. That's a USDA statistic. I think in California it might even be 93% of farms are family farms. So I think right there it talks about it addresses a multi-generational issue. But the nature of crops in California have migrated from low-value crops like cotton and wheat to high-value crops like grapes and pistachios and almonds, which are permanent crops. So a permanent crop, and these trees last for a very long time. In pistachio's case, they grow productively for several hundred years, 300-400 years. So you're certainly planting them for your family, and you take a very long-term horizon. And I think it emboldens your desire to take care of that asset. It makes you the true stewards of your environment. So you would never overwater it or give it too much soil amendment or nutrients. You would just be wasting it. So that's, I think, part of the messaging about agriculture is a lot of people who don't understand agriculture think we waste resources, we waste water, we waste nutrients. It's totally false, because we give it exactly what it needs, not a drop more, not a drop less, because we want it to thrive. If you overwater it, you'll drown it and kill it. So I think that really demonstrates that we really are the true stewards of the environment, and we care the most. Same thing with soil amendments or resources. We wouldn't put on additional chemicals or nutrients or applications needlessly, just like the human body. If you only need 1,000 milligrams of vitamin D and you take 5,000, well, it just the excess exits your body. Same thing with a tree. If the tree only needs a certain amount of nitrogen, and that's what it takes, no matter how much you apply to the soil. And we know this as farmers. So this is our balance. This is our desire to put everything in balance. So you have to know what the leaves need. You have to know what the roots need. You have to know the capacity and the functional capability of your soil, so that you can deliver the nutrients appropriately without drowning it or starving it, because sometimes there's all kinds of chemical problems that you can address. So I think this is the root of sustainability, that we can chemically change our environment. We can, through pH adjustments, electrical conductivity adjustments, we can change the soil to make water penetration improve. And if water penetration improves, then you have no standing water. You have no standing water, you have no evaporative loss. There's a lot of things that we do through science and research that improve the farming condition. And it all really invests into the health of the system, the ecosystem, and the trees, and the long-term viability of the business that support those trees.
Some of the things that you mentioned, the soil, the water, all the resources, you have to be stewards of that, because you're looking at not just today, but you're looking for the future. Because if these resources, you abuse the resources, it actually comes back to bite the business, right? Even from looking at it from a profit standpoint, or looking at it from a business standpoint, that still makes business sense. Yes, to be a steward of the earth is a very important thing, but even from a business sense, taking care of the resources that actually feed you.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not easy to know what the long-term effects of our decisions are. I'll give you an example. Everyone in California switched from flood irrigation to drip irrigation. It sounds good. In principle, it is good. You're using less water, you have less evaporative loss, but the truth is you have less excess water making it down into the water table. With flood irrigation, the trees take what it needs and the rest really goes down in the ground. You do have evaporative loss, but with drip irrigation, you put it right on top of the root zone and you give the tree exactly what it needs, and there's no excess. And that migration to save water, which is a really viable, really noble cause, it had negative consequences in that it's starving our groundwater table. So really, that's the kind of thing that farmers know. We instinctively know. And so now we're changing it up. Now it's okay, during wet years, heavy rain years, everybody should do flood. During the dry years, we should do drip. And that kind of innovation comes with information and also necessity. And so that's another point that I'll make, is that technology has really shown up in farming a lot, in many ways, in California, particularly to reduce our resources and our inputs, like improve water use, and also to identify mistakes. Maybe there are areas which has a better land use, like this should not really be planted to this particular crop because the soil properties aren't right. So they used to just plant anything anywhere. I think these days, with precision agriculture, we can evaluate satellite imagery. We really have a much more profound understanding of soil chemistry. We can more suitably adapt the environment to crops, and we do see that evolving. But these new advancements need to make it to Sacramento. They need to be encompassed in new policy. Right now, it's all ignored. The messages of the past about how agriculture behaves in terms of stewardship of the environment, use of resources, use of labor, really the messages are stale, and it's old information. They're operating on old information. Because today, I have multi-generational families working for me that, the grandparents worked for me, and thank God, they love working for me, and I love helping their family, and I've paid for weddings and all kinds of things, and we're partners in this. And there are many, many families like that. So really, we don't need more laws to make that better. I think just good companies treat people well, and you need a lot of laws to do that. So that's the point I'm trying to make, that when we make the right decisions where all of the stakeholders have an alignment, then you have a profitable business, and you have a healthy environment, and you have wholesome food, and you have happy employees, and the system is very, very sustainable. So really, it's just like a human. If you're sick, if you're tired, if you're weak, if you don't get any exercise, well, you're going to get sick. It's the same thing with trees and plants. If they're healthy and we give them the appropriate water and they have sunny days and the appropriate nutrition, they're going to have a thick hull on their pistachios, and that's going to resist damage, disease, and infestation. So really, it's an ecosystem. It's not just a check-the-box list for managing the environment.
That's interesting. When you're saying that, again, relating back to healthcare, right? We at UnitedAg, through the Innovation Forum, whatever, spend time to understand what does it mean to be for the health and wellness, and that's what you're doing from a plan standpoint. So that's what exactly. So is the right amount of water? Is the right amount? What are the earth conditions? So you are taking care of the plan and making sure it's a healthy plan. So that's what it gives.
It's an ecosystem, of course. So we actually take it much, much further. So we have satellites, we have software that puts about 200 layers of information on top. So everything from soil, water, vegetative information that has to do with light reflectivity from the satellite imagery. We take a production history, yield, quality history, the variety of the tree, the age of the tree, how it was farmed, the water source. We take literally hundreds of layers. We put it through an artificial intelligence system. And some of the information is discrete, like you have a soil value. But some of it is a little bit not so discrete. The same thing with the human body. So you have lab results, you have blood tests, you have x-rays, you have all these things. And some of it is easy to interpret and some of it is not. And you generalize and you make a pathology and a diagnosis to the best of your ability. It's the same thing with us. So we have all this information about the orchard, about the tree, all these layers of information, and we put it through neural networks, and we can really derive sort of an unbelievably accurate profile down to the tree, I might add. We farm millions of trees, but through the software, we can manage each individual tree. We know how old it is. We know the properties every year. It may get sick, and we can literally see that. We can detect that. We can measure that. And that's pretty impressive. And that's kind of how we manage this. That's how we are such good stewards of the environment, is that we know when problems arise, we can address it, we can diagnose it, and we can resolve it. So now, in theory, the system would farm autonomously. So it would tell you when there's a water leak or identify when there's some outbreak, and we should be able to see that and sense that, and that's the goal.
I know I see this from the healthcare side of things. When you provide service, when you do what you do with empathy and kind of taking care of people from every resource that we have, the service or the way you healthcare is done, you can feel it, right? It's a feeling that you get because you call member services, it's a feeling. You're in the hospital, it's a feeling. When you eat the pistachio, is there something in Setton? Because you eat Setton pistachios and every year you send me a box and this is the best treasured gift of the year. You can actually feel it. Because is that something to do with, aren't you like the one of the your pistachios is the best tasting pistachios or something?
We call them the best tasting, but I really think it has to do with the science behind it and the innovation behind it. So we spend a lot of time and effort trying to make our process better for the product, better for the environment, better for the grower. And so we deploy a ton of technology. We've been issued a half a dozen patents. So we deploy satellite software to analyze the vegetative conditions of the trees or the mechanical conditions of the soil, and we can see that in software through the satellite imagery. And then when we get the product in-house, we're taking all kinds of analytics of the product. So certainly samples, visual samples, chemical samples. And we have a lot of automation in the process to sort of basically divert the best pistachios to, If we look at it philosophically even, just to kind of go up a little bit higher, 30,000 feet, you look at the organic movement. So the organic movement was really kind of a very progressive, sort of ideologically driven movement because people didn't want synthetic chemicals in our food supply. And that's all noble and that's all great. But today, 30 years later, you look at it, it's just really a list of what you cannot do. It's not telling you anything about how do you improve the ecosystem, how do you improve the supply chain. It's just saying you cannot use this chemical and you cannot use this. That's all it is, really. You cannot use synthetic chemicals. So what we are espousing now is a more modern view of agriculture. It's called regenerative farming. And really what it deploys is all these techniques that I mentioned before, beneficial insects to reduce pesticide use. It is applying natural chemicals to your soil to adjust their chemical properties so they behave differently, permanently differently. So you get better water penetration, or sometimes there's nutrients in your soil that is absolutely bound and trapped, and the tree roots, the tap roots cannot get access to it because of the chemical state. It's a hardened, calcified state. It cannot solubilize.
So the water absorption is less?
Right. Or the minerals don't solubilize because the chemistry doesn't allow it. So then you just have to change the chemistry, and it takes a little bit of knowledge. But once you change the chemistry, then those minerals become solubilizable, and the tree can use them. So in that case, we have orchards where it had so much built up nitrogen or built up fertilizer from 200 years of farming that we haven't applied anything in 8 or 9 years because all we're doing is we've adjusted the chemistry, and the tree is taking available inventory of those minerals already built up in the soil, stuck in the soil, that we're releasing. So there's so many ways to be sustainable, we find, through technology. And we haven't done anything. All we've done is identified the problem through technology, fixed it, and now, wow, look at this. We're literally getting 35, 40% less water requirement. And I'm telling you, we have 1,000 acres. We haven't put anything on for almost maybe 10 years because the minerals have been released this way. So really fascinating stuff going on. Regenerative ag, yeah. So and it's also about not disturbing the soil. It's about allowing cover crops to grow down the aisle. So we used to think, I can tell you, our firm used to think 15, 20 years ago, you didn't want a cover crop because it competed against your plant for the nutrients in the water. You wanted your plant to have it all. But then we find out, no, that's not really the case. The roots are deeper. There's all kinds of reasons why that isn't the case. But let's talk nutrient-wise. It turns out that the particular plants you choose to grow can actually transform your soil for you. So let's say you need to add some nitrogen. I'm just giving that an example. It could be boron. It could be anything, calcium. Well, you can find a plant whose natural growth leaves that as a byproduct. Oh, so that's amazing. So now we figured that out. So now we have a kind of a repertoire of row crop plants that deliver chemistry naturally, organically, just through sun and osmosis and the presence of chlorophyll. Really amazing things.
Where does this happen? So this research is happening here in your...
Regenerative ag is a much broader, wider global movement. It's not as well established in America as it is in Europe and other places. I would believe, if I'm setting a trend, I would believe it's going to supplant and displace organic. Because I said organic doesn't actually improve the quality of the land. It just prevents you from adding synthetics. But regenerative farming actually improves the soil improves the
composition
health
of the soil. Yeah.
It's literally identifying those steps and techniques to improve the health of the soil, to further advance the needs of the tree without introducing you can still introduce chemicals with regenerative ag because many chemicals are natural, of course, easily.
Yeah.
And what we do find in the organic world, which is a little bit misleading, is that you can have a natural variant of a chemical and a synthetic variant of a chemical. So organics may say, hey, you can't add this chemical, but I can find the same thing in a natural form, and then I can add it. So organic people are under the misconception that there are no chemicals. Well, that is not true. There are no synthetic chemicals. So that's the difference. Regenerative ag has a focus on the health of the plant and the ecosystem. And I think that's a really positive trend.
So isn't that kind of a long-term strategy versus thinking short-term? Because in short-term, organic, so it's going to benefit me today because I eat organic. I feel great about that because I am an organic food. I consume that. But when you look at the regenerative, you're creating, actually changing the composition of the soil. So it's going to be a long-term benefit, right?
Absolutely. By definition, it's a multi-year engagement. By definition, you're changing the physical properties in a positive way. You're establishing a baseline, and then you're fixing it in a permanent way. And that definitely doesn't happen in one season. And now I think we're at a point, so our company's been doing regenerative farming for about 10 years, really totally under the radar, but now it's getting more popularized. And we can demonstrate clearly through profit and through numbers. We can say, look, our water use is down, our applications, so soil amendments, chemical inputs, nitrogen, boron, calcium, these inputs are way, way down, if not gone altogether, because we're making the available inventory available again. Make soil great again. That's my statement. So, so less water, less inputs. We're getting better yield. The insect damage has essentially really transformed itself because it's almost disappeared because the beneficials are stabilizing the ecosystem. All these things, and it's really impressive. I'd say that we're shocked at the results. And now we have classes. We have soil health classes. We have regenerative ag classes for our network of growers to teach them and give this information back. And it's startling, the testimonials we get. I mean, we have people saying, "Oh, you saved our farm. It was dying, and now you've saved it."
So you've taken a long-term strategy and worked on it, and now you are kind of educating others to use that. So then you see the numbers. You're a numbers guy. I'm a numbers person.
But it's a bit, we're breaking the mold. I have to say that the fertilizer salesman and the chemical salesman and the pesticide salesman, they have a script, and their script is to sell more chemicals. And what we are teaching the growers is that script isn't necessarily accurate, that they want you to put on more nitrogen, but I'm going to tell you why. You don't need more nitrogen. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to show you, you actually have probably 200 years of nitrogen in your soil trapped that your trees are ignoring or can't access or can't utilize because of chemistry restrictions. Something won't solubilize, for example, at a high EC or a low pH or whatever the scenario is. So we see it all the time. And so then we're fighting these guys. And so then the chemical salesman is telling the farmer, don't listen to Setton. They don't know what they're talking about. So that's
Because
That's, of course.
that's their they're selling
They're selling chemicals.
chemicals.
So we're really disrupting things.
Yeah,
And the AI now that we're applying to all this information is really,
that is exciting.
really disrupting things.
That is
It's fun.
exciting. And again, it ties back to, I keep tying it back to healthcare, which from a UnitedAg standpoint, but that is what you're doing. It's understanding the health of everything that touches, right? The soil, the plant, the everything. And that we do that with our, the chemicals that we put in our bodies. That's right. People who want to sell and they say you have to take this and this and this, and we just take it. But is that really impacting us?
Yeah. And so I think the model that we're using is certainly a medical model. So as I mentioned before, a person has x-rays and blood tests and examination results and all this hard data and soft data. And it's hard to sort and collate. But in our case, the tree, I guess, would be the human, and we can evaluate all the way up and down, from the tissue and leaf health to we can even measure tiny movements, micrometer level movements of the tree trunk. And a tree actually breathes overnight, just like a human does. So the tree will expand at night as it withdraws some of its chlorophyll and things out of the leaves into the trunk. And then in the morning, it goes back out. So trees are a living, breathing biodynamic system. And we can certainly measure that.
Listening to you, Lee, again, connecting it back to what we do and how we take care of providing empathy in healthcare is what we say we do at UnitedAg. And part of listening to you, we see ourselves as the stewards of people because of that empathy in healthcare. And just listening to you today, I'm inspired to hear some of the things that you're doing from Setton Pistachio farms and agriculture, and how that connects back to bringing back that empathy for plants, for people, for soil, for water, and all the resources, and truly being that steward that's needed, that stewardship in business that's needed. You're providing that.
Setton Pistachio was founded by Joshua Setton, who has the biggest heart. He's the most generous person, the most insightful, thoughtful person you'll ever meet. And I think the business has developed exactly like that. And that's why you say when you open a bag and you eat Setton Pistachio, you feel the love, you taste the love. We're growing the trees that way. I mean, our trees are happy. Our trees are very happy. And the employees are happy, our customers are happy, our growers are happy. So we literally have the same customers for 30, 40 years, the same growers for 30, 40 years, the same trees for 30, 40 years. So continuity, stability of process, stability of focus on quality control is imperative. And I think just the way a tree plants its roots deep to anchor itself for strong winds and cloudy days, I think the same thing for our business. Agriculture does that. So the people and the trees themselves and the plant and the way we embrace our customers and all of our stakeholders, I think that's why it works.